Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Sunday Club. We're back after a hiatus. We had a lot of multiple issue amongst all of us, so that's why we weren't here with you all on Sunday. But now we are, and thank you so much for joining us. And of course, we're going to dive right into the topic of the day, which is actually been the topic of the week. It's been a week since the Hamas terror strike in Israel, which led to the killing of over 1,000 Jews in one day, the largest number killed in a day since the Holocaust. So it's brought back a lot of very frightening and traumatic memories for a lot of people, especially the Jewish community around the world, and of course in Israel as well. And some of you may think that this is an ongoing conflict, and and it's true, we keep hearing things about rockets fired from Gaza into Israel and vice versa, and it's just something headlines that we become all too familiar with, and to a certain extent desensitized about as well. But frankly, what happened last Saturday, rather, on the 7th of October, was something that has just changed the whole dynamic. And to get a better understanding of that, I'm joined by a great panel: Suhel, Sandip, Pallavi, Ghosh, Ambassador Dogra, and of course, Abhijit. But I want to just lead straight into Ambassador. Ambassador, please give us a little brief about what's been going on and what the history is, what the present circumstances are, and what do you see in the future?
Well, I think history would be a very long ride, but let me start with Saturday when it all happened. Uh, People make comparison with what happened on Yom Kippur 50 years back. That was also a surprise, and that was also an unpleasant surprise. But this was a horrible surprise, what happened on Saturday. Because even terrorists, the worst kind of terrorists, do not go and kill babies or pregnant women, take out the unborn child from the womb. And, these acts are not heard of from ancient times. Maybe in the Middle Ages in some places, but in modern times, such kind of mass terrible murder is not only unexpected but also absolutely abhorrent. So that was the initial reaction all around the world. But as news cycle, and you have a great panel of media experts, they would tell you, as news cycle is, people start revising their opinion, getting on to other things after a couple of days. And unfortunately, this seems to be the case here also, because while the horror still persists, but now it has been replaced by another horror, the feeling that Israel is overdoing it by shutting off water supply, shutting off electricity supply, and food provisions, etc., to Gaza. Now, there is a ray of hope in all this that Blinken has now gone on to an Arab shuttle, diplomatic shuttle, which is reminding us of what Kissinger used to do in the 70s. Uh, and it has brought about some results, it seems. His travels to Jordan, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, and now in Egypt, and tomorrow he's planning to go to Israel again. So apparently, the immediate effect is that Israel has restored the water supply to Gaza. But parallel to that, there's another development that Lebanon is, or from Lebanon, a barrage of rockets has started coming into Israel. So it's not all a softening of posture, but a sort of nuanced messaging which is going on from both sides. Israel says, okay, we will not go to the same extreme as Hamas had done, and we will restore the water supply. But Iran is not interested in such gestures. So, and Blinken has not gone to Iran, nor would he ever go to Iran under the present circumstances. So you have a situation where the factors on ground are very delicate, very uncertain, because anything could happen. A misdirected missile or another foray by some terrorists into Israel could again raise the anger level to phenomenal proportions. The second thing is that is diplomacy going to satisfy the actors who started all this? I mean, Hamas, backed by Hezbollah, backed again by Iran, and perhaps by some other greater actors in the world. So I think it is too soon to start hoping that maybe it will taper off. But the second thing, which this particular episode has shown to the world in much greater measure than ever before. I mean, the war in Ukraine had media and propaganda in full form, but this one has been quick off the feet, as if every side, both sides, were preparing for such a thing. And they were feeding media with their version, maybe some of it fake, some of it propaganda, but the versions were ready, and for the moment, at least the world believed them, whether it was the Israel side or the Palestine side, Hamas side. I shouldn't say Palestine, Hamas side. So we are in a situation where there are wars on two fronts. One, on land between armies and air force or whatever, and second, on the media front, on the front of perception of the world, because that is equally important. So I'll leave it there. If there is anything in terms of follow up, I'm here.
Okay, thank you so much, Ambassador, for leading us into this very important discussion. I'm going to now go to Suhel. Suhel, you've been tracking the news, I assume, like all of us. And what's your initial take on this particular topic?
So I have two or three things to say very briefly. Number one, it was a mammoth intelligence failure on the part of Israel to not realize what was happening next door in Gaza. The infiltration by the Hamas is one thing, but the infiltration into Israeli communities is another. So that famed Israeli intelligence came to naught. Number two, obviously, as I think Abhijit has been more vocal and rightly so on this, there is no place for terrorism. To call a terrorist organization a bunch of freedom fighters in itself is a misnomer and an insult to humanity. Clearly, there was provocation, there was the need to incite, and Hamas, for people who don't know, they should realize that Hamas itself is not just feared, it's also hated by many quarters in the Gaza Strip. Third, which is very critical, is that Israel may have done whatever it did, but it's still not enough in the eyes of many Israeli families whose relatives are now in captivity by Hamas at the Gaza Strip. In fact, a lot of those families went on a massive protest today. So there are these three or four issues. Now, if you see, the geopolitical dynamics have suddenly altered. Iran and Saudi, who were never in bed, are now in bed again, or so the media tells us. The last point that I want to make is there is also a very, very pernicious argument that is playing out in the media, and some countries need to be careful. You saw what happened in New York, what happened in London with pro Hamas crowds. I have no issues with pro Palestinian crowds, but I have major issues with pro Hamas crowds when you actually give licenses to kill in the name of humanity. I don't even want to get into the Harvards and the Stanfords. They're as woke can be. And, you saw how quickly they retracted when their job offers came up to try. So that's basically my initial take.
Right. Right, thank you. Sandeep, over to you now. Suhail has rightly pointed out that this is a massive intelligence failure, and of course, the Israelis know that, and we'll get into that when the time is right for them to evaluate these things. But what do you make of this particular circumstance that we have right now, wherein the Israelis are preparing for a ground attack, but there's also reports now that it will be ground, sea, as well as air. So it's a full frontal attack. Water has been cut off, electricity has been cut off, internet is not accessible for people, especially in northern Gaza. How do you see this in terms of the whole narrative that is now playing out of war crimes, and how this is not according to the rule of war in the international community?
See, one part is war crimes, and since we have Ambassador, really appreciate his views because for lay people like us and who are not really political commentators or at least geopolitical commentators, the entire episode, whether from the time of attack to now, does appear, if I may use the term, a little bizarre. Uh, Today, I was reading on the flight a magazine which I usually take with a lot of salt, The Economist, its analysis about what's happening. I think it will be rather simplistic to write it off as an intelligence failure. There can be an intelligence failure to the extent of your not being able to judge the severity of the attack or the planning, but to be for a country like Israel, to be totally taken by surprise, 100% sounds very odd. And now that whatever you are saying, that if they were to really, let's say, launching all kind of frontal attacks, three front, etc., they go through. Ultimately, what are they going to finally achieve by totally pasting this entire that little strip where you have some 350 square kilometers or 450 square kilometers, and then ultimately, what will they do? They can't. They will not occupy it. They'll come back, and then again spring up, some sort of residual Hamas or other people. And within Hamas also, when you're talking about this intelligence failure, again, I was reading The Economist. They're saying not everybody within the Hamas world was even aware of this sort of a planning. This is going on, and how could that have been possible? How could a sort of a terrorist or militant outfit carry out things to such finesse that we are? So I personally think that there is more to it than meets the eye, and which will unravel over a period of time, and it has a lot to do with Israel's internal politics, plus the global forces who are pro and anti Netanyahu, how they have been playing it, what Netanyahu himself has been to stick to power. There's one suggestion that he weakened the Palestinian authorities to actually start dealing with Hamas as a more legitimate representative. So all those confusion which is there, and I think someone like Ambassador can enlighten us a bit more rather than what we tend to take the top line from media, and who, by the way, I personally feel certainly about the Indian media is equally clueless. A lot of them, though, people are just flying and paratrooping into Israel and reporting from there, wearing different kind of jackets. But I don't think how far they are clued on. Also, I'm not too sure.
Abhijit, Sandip says that this probably is not a massive intelligence failure. It's hard to imagine that the Israelis were completely taken by surprise. Something like 1,500 Hamas terrorists infiltrated Israel.
Yeah.
So what do you make?
See, what happens is, first of all, you didn't call me by my name, which is quite shameful. And I want you to mute yourself because your fan is making a lot of noise, Unlike some peasants, some of us actually have air conditioners. Now, I have sent, because I don't have Ambassador Dogra's number, I have sent Sandip, Suhel, Advaita, and Pallavi a list of ingredients. I don't want you to tell me or tell each other what you're going to make from it, but I want each of you to come up with a dish that you would like, if it was given to your housekeeper, that you'd make from it. So see, there are 3 levels of failure out here. First is the intel leading up to the attack. The second is the breach of the wall. And the third is the failure of the Israeli response. Okay. Now, the first part is the live experiment that we're doing, which by the time I finish talking, I'll come back to each of you. I'm only going to talk about 2 and 3 right now, and then we'll go to the live experiment where we do things. Now, what has happened? What is the wall? It's a electric not barbed wire, but it's an electric wire fence. Okay, quite tall, about 10, 12 feet tall. Some parts of it actually have concrete barriers, but there is a no man's zone for about 200-300 meters on the Palestinian side. And that is, no vegetation is allowed to grow there or anything like that. And it is monitored. Now in India, you see, we have depth. We can build 2-3 walls because we've got space. There they have no space. Gaza is 1/4 the size of Delhi, not the national capital region, but 1/4 the size of Delhi, the city, which is to say it is probably the same area as, defense colony to Southex. Make a about 20-kilometer strip of inner to outer ring road to Lutyens, Delhi. And that is Gaza. That's it. No more than that. So what happens is these, there's not enough space. So what they do is we can provide depth in land. They provide depth in diversity, which is to say every 200 yards, they have motion sensors, they have thermal cameras, they have ground radars, etc., different kinds of sensors, each of which correct the mistakes of the other. So they provide redundancy to each other, number one. Number two, if an infiltration is detected, they have remote machine gun posts, which are controlled from a distance, and they start shooting people. If that fails, a lightly armored patrol of Humvee vehicles, which can resist up to about 7.5 mm bullets. They're like bulletproof cars, basically. That will be sent. And if that fails, a tank will be sent. Okay. Hamas anticipated all of this, and Israel never anticipated that all of these will fail simultaneously on one day. And how did Hamas make it fail? You see, when the wires were cut, the wires have a little bit of electricity running through them. So any kind of cut breaks the circuit and it triggers an alarm. But that's not what they did first. They first removed all the sensors. Okay, what they did was they took these cheap drones. I think all of us are now used to drones, these small drones which can carry small cameras. And those bombs were a little bigger than, the atom bombs that we use on Diwali, and placed it on each sensor. Now, if you don't understand the kind of sensitivity of sensors and how small an explosion is required to get rid of them, Diwali is coming up. I suggest you take your old iPhone or whatever phone you have, put an atom bomb on it and trigger it and see what happens. It won't survive. Okay, that is what they did to remove those sensors. Next, what happened is they used a slightly bigger bomb to take out the machine gun emplacements. And they used slightly bigger bombs to take out the light armored vehicles when they came, and finally a much heavier bomb, 2 to 3 kg bombs, were deposited by these drones on top of tanks. The top of the tank is the weakest part, to take out the tank. Now, this is very crucial. Why is this crucial? Because these are all tactics that we've seen in Ukraine, that were developed in Ukraine, using civilian drones for military attack like that have all migrated out here. Okay, what was amazing was the complexity. And then finally, everything has gotten, one after the other, they've gotten rid of your redundancies. We now come, so the wall is broken, part 2 is done. Now we come to part 3, which is why the Israeli response failed. You see, all the commanders were congregated at a place called Nahal Oz, a little kibbutz about 2-3 kilometers from the border. It was the second place, I think, that that Hamas struck. All the southern commanders were killed in the space of 20 to 30 minutes like that, because they'd all congregated at one spot. The second issue was a warning was sent out, infiltration is happening, people are inside. But because none of the soldiers realized the scale of the infiltration, they thought, oh, well, infiltration always happens. It'll be 1 or 2 guys and somebody else will shoot them. They never realized that, and the entire southern legions, not legions, but southern garrisons were wiped out in no time. And we've seen all those horrific videos. I'm not going to, talk about them again. So this is what happened. And because there were no commanders or soldiers left out there, there was nobody giving ground intelligence back up in any coherent way to the high command sitting in Jerusalem and Tel Aviv. And so the response itself took time because they didn't know what they were dealing with. So this is 1, 2, 3. Now let's come to 1. Just for our viewers, I have given Advaita, Suhel, Sandip, and Pallavi a list of ingredients. Now, I don't want you to tell us the ingredients, but I want I'll start with you, Sandip. What dish have you made out of your ingredients? It's the same set of ingredients.
He's on mute.
I can't hear you. You're on mute.
You gave me onion and garlic. Yeah. What do I do with
No,
it?
no. I
Just
gave
make
you. I gave you a whole set of ingredients.
No,
What do you
I haven't
make?
been able. I haven't been able to see. I passed because I'm speaking on my phone.
Okay,
Oh,
I'll tell
okay.
you what I'm
Okay,
making.
so Sandip,
I'm doing because we're talking about the Mediterranean. I'm doing a garlic hunker dip.
a garlic hunker dip. Suhel, what are you doing?
I'm doing a Bengali chicken curry, doi chicken curry.
And
Because it
Pallavi
has
ran away
potato.
because she Pallavi ran away because she can't
She has to
cook
check.
for
I'm
life
No,
without
here.
she has
me.
to.
So
She
I
has to
Now
will.
ask
she's
her
back.
cook.
No. I will make hing aloo curry.
You will make hingalu. See, this is the nature of intelligence, audience. I gave every one of them the exact same list of ingredients, but every one of them came up with a different dish. Intel is like that. You hear different things from different people, but each person combines the constituent elements differently. No cook will produce the same thing. Intel is a very unprocessed product. It's like giving people tomatoes and onions and saying, kuch pakao. Kuch pakao mane kya pakaoge tum? Every one of them. So you might it is just sheer dumb luck sometimes. Or the amount of work that is required for Suhel to guess what was in my mind that I wanted to make out of this, or Advaita or Pallavi or Sandeep to guess. And therein lies the problem. This is how raw intel is. Raw intel is not when you pick up a phone, like Bollywood or Hollywood. Oh, boss, Suhel, I'm planning a bomb attack on Sandeep's house. So, you and me, we'll go with your driver and then we'll go to Wellington and, I'll take a machine gun and you take 2 bombs. You throw the grenades inside the house and then I'll enter and shoot him with a machine gun. This is not how you collect. No intelligence is ever collected like this, unless you're a prize idiot who doesn't know the first thing about operational security, in which case you're not even fit enough to be a terrorist.
Yeah, but the other thing is because this is a highly surveilled
Yeah.
area.
No.
Abhijit,
Now, see, it doesn't matter.
no.
Surveillance
I'm
does not
asking you a
matter because
question. I'm
sometimes.
asking you a question. I'm asking you a question. They say that since it's highly surveilled and there's technical kind of surveillance which is very advanced, they went back to traditional methods of communicating.
Yes,
No, in
it
fact,
was all paper
Abhijit,
communication.
yeah. Did
They
you read
found.
the? Sorry, Abhijit, did you read that Afghan working president's, long tweet which Vikram Sood
Yeah,
retweeted, shared?
I didn't agree with a lot of it because we kind of know what happens out here because the Israelis found the paper documents, which we still don't know because see, human intelligence is a very crucial part of intelligence gathering. And after the 2006 war that Israel waged in Lebanon, it was an over reliance on technology was clearly marked. They said you should not do that. You should go back to human intelligence and things like that. I know for a fact they had significant human intelligence assets on the ground in Gaza. What we don't know is how they pulled the wool over those human intelligence assets. Because all the 3,500 Hamas fighters who infiltrated into Israel that day, their commanders all had maps. Now, if you assume 20, you're still looking at a few hundred commanders who had maps and instructions of where to go. They knew exactly where to go, what to do, and how many people to kill. So there is a huge amount of unanswered questions about the human intelligence. With the rest of it, I think, it's very difficult. You can only judge a mistake if it was predictable with the benefit of hindsight. If it was not predictable with the benefit of hindsight, then it isn't an intel failure per se. It's just shit happens. You get things right 40 out of 41 times, and at one time you go wrong.
Yeah. Yeah, this is massive, massive though. Pallavi, I want to come to you. A lot of the criticism of the Israelis and the polity, Israel polity, is that there was so much internal strife between the political parties. There were protests because Netanyahu was trying to make some moves or some changes in the law, in the Supreme Court there, and there was a lot of citizen protest. How much do you think does this kind of unrest, because we live in a country also where we are targets of terror, we also have a polity which is always at each other's throats and find very little to agree on, how much do you blame this, and how does this play out in the Indian context?
So in India, I'm noticing a kind of a resurgence of the left in the sense that the left, I mean, even as we speak, tomorrow there are protests which are being planned by many of the left parties and also those who support the left in support of Palestine. We've always consistently made this difference between Hamas and Palestine, that the two are completely different things. And especially, and I think we spoke about this earlier also, that on a day when the Israelis were being bombed, there were people who were being attacked, you come out with statements where you justify it by saying, look, ye to hona hi tha, because this is what happens eventually. The Israelis have been hurting us, and therefore you can't expect these people to keep quiet. I'm just thinking in the Indian context, is this the way we are going to justify, say, an act of terror by the Lashkar-e-Taiba and say, look, this has been happening to these young people, they are being suffering, and therefore, it's kind of justified. I see over here yet another attempt, and this is coming so very close to the Lok Sabha elections, a kind of a resurgence of the left, where and the so-called liberal who are making it out to be that look, it's a bad, very big, bad white world which our government is towing, and it's the poor people who India has always stood by, Congress has stood by, so and so, and interestingly, the BJP has also stood by. They are the ones who are now be having to pay the price for it, and how unfair is it? And in what's happening in Israel is different. It's having an impact on our local politics because suddenly that Modi bashing has become. It's become resurfaced. It's become all about look his statements, and you're seeing the kind of pot shots which are being taken about the first big statement which came in from the Prime Minister, then the MEA coming out with a statement. I think the MEA was very clear and the government was very clear from day one. We do support the idea of Palestine. India has always supported them, but we just cannot support any act of terror. Hamas, for example, certainly what happened to Israelis on that particular day. I see that being played out, and I think at some point of time, and it already has actually entered, thanks to the Congress's statement, it has entered the poll fray as we move closer and closer to a Lok Sabha election, and I don't think this war in Israel slash Palestine is going to end anytime soon. It's something which is going to keep on lingering. It's never going to say, okay, fine, it's over, there's peace which has returned. Pretty much the same situation vis-a-vis Ukraine and Russia. That's exactly what's going to be happening. And they're always, I mean, I think Abhijit was absolutely bang on. Everyone is going to look at it their own which way, which is fine. You don't have to all have the same voice. But should it be then used to say that Israelis deserve it? And I'm looking at a Twitter. I mean, people are coming out with pictures. Look how people in Gaza have been hit. You're cutting off the water supply. You're cutting off this supply. How unfair is it? There's always, unfortunately, a collateral damage in war. But to make it a political issue back home over here in India and to justify and say that Israelis deserved it, I think that's where the problem lies.
Ambassador, I just have two questions for you. One is, of course, what Pallavi raised. It was the response of the Prime Minister as well as the MEA. Are they contrary to each other, or do they go together, or are we seeing a shift in India's position when it comes to the Israel-Palestine conflict? And the second question is about the hostages. I mean, we forget that there are over 100 hostages still being held by Hamas in Israel. What can the government do? What is through the diplomatic channels to make sure that they are not harmed and that a release is possible, especially as war clouds are looming?
Well, Advaita, as you know, I was planning to stay only for 15 minutes because I had to go elsewhere. But your program is so diverse and so engrossing that I lost all track of time. So this will be my last final intervention. But I must compliment all your guests that they have their views and they express them with a lot of conviction. So that again is different from the almost daily presentations I participate in. So compliments to you and to your friends or guests. Uh, to answer your question regarding Prime Minister, uh, I think we have to understand it in the context. Prime Minister made his first statement when the entire world was in a state of shock. So his statement, if anyone reads it carefully, is with regard to the act of terror. You don't bring in ABCD to XYZ in a statement which is sharply focused. So I think we have to give a responsible statement its due and not nitpick as to what MEA said a week later or a couple of days later. That was in a different context altogether. By that time, the situation had changed to a significant extent. By that time, Israel was also preparing to retaliate, and MEA statement was just an add-on. It was not a substitute to PM statement. It was an add-on to say that yes, as far as Palestine, and mind it, MEA talked of Palestine, it did not talk of Hamas. So what it said was that as far as Palestine is concerned, our position remains the same as it was earlier. So we should not read too much or wrongly what Prime Minister had said with regard to the act of terror. And he repeated it. Uh, and again, the emphasis was on terrorists and the responsibility of the world to view acts of terror anywhere as pure and simple terror and nothing else. The second part of your question is about where do we go from here? How do we get the hostages out? Now, that is why the shuttle diplomacy I talked about, because Blinken is trying his best because there are Americans involved besides other nationalities, including one from India, it seems. So Blinken is trying his best to persuade, let's say, Qatar, which seems to be the repository of all things bad in the world these days, from Taliban to Hamas. And it's interesting that the Iranian envoy reached Qatar almost immediately after Blinken left. So there are various factors at play. Uh, Maybe Egypt might have some role to play in this. Maybe this act of restoring the water supply may have some trigger to play in getting some hostages out, maybe women to start with, or children to start with, and then the others. But that is hoping for too much and too soon, I think. Uh, I hope I'm wrong, but Hamas is not into it as an act of mercy. Hamas is going to extract the maximum price. For example, the last time when an exchange took place, just for one soldier, they got 1,000 Hamas prisoners out of Israel. So Hamas is a very tough customer. But one more thing I want to add before I finish off, that the timing of it intrigues me. And I'm not saying it with any degree of confidence because when the war is going on or when some trigger starts, there are all kinds of theories floating around, some very intelligent, like Abhijit. Sorry, Abhijit, for taking your name, but like Abhijit had pointed out in great detail. Uh, but the timing of the war conveys a lot of messages because West was engaged fully into Ukraine war. I mean, there were hints that it might be finding the expenditure too much or the length of time too much and so on. That apart. But otherwise, there were repeated statements that we are in it for as long as it takes, especially by America. Oh, and the interested parties knew that ammunition supply was at a low level. They were running out of their own reserves. So, isn't it the best time for Hamas to do what it did and for others perhaps to get into the act? Because The other hints which are coming through are that Hamas had been preparing for it for the last 2 years. Whether it is so or not is a different thing. So, what I'm saying in conclusion is that you don't, I mean, we don't know which shape it is going to take. But my prayers and hope, as with every right thinking person, is that at least the hostages are taken out and the harm to civilians is as less as possible, whether they are Palestinians in Gaza or Israelis in Israel or elsewhere, because there was a stabbing even in China of a Italian diplomat's spouse. So let us hope that the war takes place between those who are engaged in the business of war, or conflict takes place between those who are responsible for handling such situations, and that women, children, and elderly or any civilian is not involved in all this. So, thank you so much, and wonderful to be with
Ambassador,
all of you.
before you go,
Yeah.
very quickly, one short
Yeah.
question. The Arab states are the Palestinians are feeling very disappointed with the response of the Arab states. There's been a lot of talk, but no one's really done anything. Even Egypt does not want to open its border and take in refugees. So why is it that so often? I mean, the Palestinian cause has been around for so long and has been hyped also so much, and why is it that the Arab states don't deliver for them?
And Advaita, one follow up on that because I'm really before Ambassador leaves to get maximum out of it. What do you think, Ambassador, should be India's position both diplomatically and otherwise? We really don't know what's happening behind the scenes, but India has tried to play a role, say, even in the Ukraine crisis, whether India, we don't know whether they're doing things behind. And nationally, what would be the position? Because what you mentioned about the Prime Minister and MEA, I thought that was a very good balancing between terrorism on one hand and what's our position on the two states theory. These are two follow ups if you can take them up.
Well, absolutely. You're right that it was a good balancing position given the interval of time. Uh, Prime Minister said what he felt he needed to say, and the nation also was at one with him. And it was also received well in many parts of the world. Uh, as far as what India can do, I think at the moment, India should adopt a voice of reason as it has always adopted. And I'm reminded of what Prime Minister told President Putin, that this is not the age of war. So India's effort should be to try and reason, to be a voice for reason, balance, and return of the situation as it was before the last Saturday. Uh, so I don't think any active involvement at this moment is possible because, the Americans are in play and so on, and they would not like a third party also to get into that. That's the reality. But Advaita, to talk about the Arab reaction to Palestine and Palestine's expectations of the Arab world, this is not a new story. Palestine since 70s, even from the time of Arafat, has been feeling that, after the oil wealth and so on, they gave us money, but their political involvement started reducing. But if you ask the Gulf Arabs, we are talking of Gulf Arabs, not of the rest of them, they say that how long can we continue like this? There has to be some kind of accommodation from the Palestinian side also. Because earlier, Palestinian was the violent voice of the Palestinians, the Arafat-led faction. Now, this has continued over the years. And in fact, Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, UAE, and so on, except for Qatar, were distancing themselves. But the present situation is such that they cannot be seen as different in their views or radical in their views to the, now it's no longer the Hamas cause, but the Palestinian cause. So Hamas has retreated into the background. The Palestinian is the one which has become the political issue for the Arab world. That if we do not support them at this moment, then we are in a difficult position with the larger Muslim Ummah. The second thing is, why is Egypt closing its borders? After all, it's a humanitarian situation. Now, again, the same thing comes up. What the Arab reaction was to Palestine from 70s onwards, it is the same reaction of Egypt. It is self-preservation. Egypt is worried that if we just open the doors, God knows how many terrorists will walk in. So Egypt is not doing it because it cannot afford to feed a few hundred or thousand or few hundred, even few 100,000 Gaza people. It is worried that what happens the day after tomorrow. So it is the implications that are coming into play. But whether these implications will be overpowered by humanitarian tragedy remains to be seen. And I think that was one of the reasons why the water got restored. So there are many factors at play. Let's see how it goes. But thank you so much
Thank
once
you so
again.
much,
And
Ambassador.
wonderful
Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank
Thank
you for your time.
you.
Goodbye.
Bye.
Suhel, how far back has this cause of the Palestinians been pushed back in terms of years by what Hamas did last week? Because it has been a cause that gets people moving. It's of course backed by the leftists who have a lot of control on mainstream media around the world. But after a terror attack like this and the horror stories that have emerged from that, even those who are supportive of the Palestinian position, which is of a two-state solution, are now on the back foot. Unmute yourself, please.
There are two things. There are two things that are going to happen. One is it possible for the dehyphenation between Palestine and Hamas? The answer is, in the present circumstances, no. The second concerns Israel. Which leader of Israel, either today, tomorrow, or day after, will actually want to get into a conversation with anyone that is representing the people in Gaza until that dehyphenation happens? Because then what you're doing is you're talking to a bunch of terrorists, and they're going to have the same political fallback. See, politicians don't give a toss about lives lost beyond a point. They are worried about being in power. Which politician in Israel will take it upon him or herself to say that, look, what happened, happened, I'm ready to forgive, but let's talk again? It won't happen. It just won't happen. Bill Clinton forced the hands of Arafat and it was Shimon Peres, I don't remember who, when they signed the accord on the lawns of the White House. It was a forced hand. And you see where they are today. So I'm a great believer that don't expect normalcy for at least the next 10, 15, 20 years. Because what has also happened is, in the surround sound, you have a new alignment of forces that are inimical to Israel. We were all pretty delighted when the UAE and all these people started welcoming Israeli flights into the UAE. But now, with Iran doing what it is, with Saudi doing this double turn, now India's relationship with Saudi Arabia, which of late has been superb, now, where does that leave us? So we had to respect Palestine and condemn Hamas, while initially we supported Israel. So I don't even know where the MEA in India is in terms of what the hell are they saying. So it's a very strange potboiler.
Abhijit, I want to ask you this. It was mentioned earlier as well on the show.
What
I
did you
mean,
call me? What did you call me?
No, but MEA ka reaction is not very different from what the government took. I mean, as I said, I mean, Israelis being attacked immediately, the first reaction cannot be, oh, we stand by Palestine also and we stand by Israel also. I think India condemned Hamas as terrorists and then, of course, said, we stand by Israel.
Yeah.
But I want to know, Abhijit, I saw these
What did you call me?
Oh, Rabbi, I
we-
saw hundreds and hundreds and thousands of people in London descending on the streets, you know,
and by
protesting.
Vancouver, Toronto,
Vancouver,
Ontario, I don't know where
I mean, across
they
Look,
are
Europe,
supporting
in Canada.
hashtag.
What?
I think we need to realize that Europe has a very long, chilling history of anti-Semitism. Did you see that happen here or in anywhere in East Asia, which does not have a history of anti-Semitism? No, no. Why does it only happen in places that have a history of anti-Semitism? Why does it only happen in Europe and the Christian world? And that too in the European Christian world. Did you see any of this in Africa? A lot of African countries are Christian. Did you see this in Ethiopia or Nigeria or Kenya or Zimbabwe? No. Then you have it in the Muslim world because the Muslim world has now become very anti-Semitic since Israel was created in 47. Okay, but where else did you see this? I think we need to realize that certain sentiments never actually go. And what has happened out there is in America and Europe is that there has been a significant left-wing capture. Now, people don't realize this because European Christianity is no longer like that. Why is it? People keep asking me why Hindus don't go off on religious riots like that, but Christians and Muslims used to go off on pogroms against Jews. It is congregational power. Every Sunday you had to go to church. So congregation and the call to the faith was kind of driven into you. European and American Christians no longer do that because church attendance is next to zero. But Muslims have to every Friday go to the mosque. You pray 5 times or don't pray 5 times at home, but going to the mosque every Friday is a very important part of the faith. So the congregation part is built into you. You combine the congregational ability of the local muezzin combined with the pulpit, literally the bully pulpit that he has, combined with high unemployment and low incomes in that community. It is toxic. It is not low incomes by itself. It is the congregational power. And for example, where the congregational power, people have jobs. So for example, in the United Arab Emirates and Saudi Arabia, have you seen protests on the street? No. So we need to, separate this. Second, I have been to Gaza. I have lived in Gaza for 10 days, and I can tell you there is no bigger shithole than Gaza. North Korea was not a shithole. North Korea was fantastic. Turkmenistan, Uzbekistan, they're lovely places to visit. Even though Turkmenistan and North Korea are the worst dictatorships on earth. Gaza, believe me, is a lot worse. The people there live in a constant... Tell me, Advaita, have you ever seen a human population where dissent doesn't exist? And yet you want us to believe that for the last 17 years since Gaza broke away from the West Bank and ran its own administration there, that the people of Gaza are 100% behind Hamas and there is no dissent out there. That everybody supports the Hamas against the Israeli occupier. Yeah, logo ko jeena hai yaar. People hate Hamas out there. They're too scared to open their mouths and tell you that. Why is it that every reporter who is reporting on the ground from Gaza of babies dying and this and that and whatnot, and they become celebrity reporters in the West, giving ground sit reps from Gaza, not one of them has the guts to report Hamas ka corruption from Gaza? Do you know the previous leader of Hamas, Khaled Meshal, before Ismail Haniyeh, who's the current leader, do you know he's accused of embezzlement worth $2.5 billion? Not million, $2.5 billion. From a bloody municipal corporation, 1/4 the size of Delhi and just 2.5 billion, which is the population of Delhi. $2.5 billion. Why don't any one of these reporters tell you that there are, that Ismail Haniyeh's son, the current leader, Hamas leader's son, who sits in luxury in Doha, the youngest son was evacuated out from Gaza on the 18th of September, less than 1 month before the attack started. His son should be safe, but nobody else's children should be safe.
But
And is on the Egyptian
Palestinians,
border with something like $2 million US or something of that sort.
but
One of the
Palestinians,
money,
Palestinians,
Abhijit,
Hamas.
everybody made
And
right
most
from
of
the
these
time
Hamas ke top bosses
Of
are
course,
away. They are in Qatar
all
and
of
all.
course.
of
Yeah, but
Arafat,
see,
and so everybody
no,
made money.
Arafat though was next level. I know a
These
lot of
people,
the Palestinian leadership, and all my boss, they lead a life I can only dream of. When I go to Europe, for example, I will stay at five-star hotels, but I can only afford a room. Okay, at the Bristol, maybe in Vienna, I'll take a junior suite, which is the maximum I can afford. These guys in Paris stay at the bloody Plaza Athene in the Imperial suite at the Imperial in Vienna, which I can't even afford in my next life. Maybe Suhel is the only person out here who can
but
afford it. I
but the
can't.
other
Where is the
I
money
complication,
can
coming
afford
from?
a suite, yeah.
Abhijit, one complication which I see out here is, what Suhel was saying. You were saying that nobody, I think, expected the Palestine Israel problem to, even without this war, to get solved in a hurry. This is something would have been there. But people are out as an outcome of this. Everybody seems to be looking forward to Netanyahu's fall, saying that this will be his undoing. That seems to be the bigger agenda of what one hears in terms of the outcome, that he won't be.
It it will be.
That seems it will be fair, but that seems to be what's engaging people more, and that bring him down. But as you said, after Suhail said that after you bring him down, who will take the next step of whether dialogue or any form of diplomacy, and how will they do? And that will once again, I think, whip up the right wing sentiment, that anybody who comes there and tries to take a more go for a peace accord or something, then you'll have more
So
polarization.
that's not how Israel works. What happens out there generally is, if history is anything to go by, uh, is that they, during the war, they don't raise questions. They form a government of national unity, which has already happened. After the war, they are vicious. They're not like Indian inquiry committees with which exonerate everybody, except from few soldiers who are made scapegoats. There they go after people. I'm telling you right now, Netanyahu is politically finished. The intelligence chiefs will all be sacked. Aman, Shin Bet, and Mossad. Mossad is probably the least complicit in this. The real complicity is the Shin Bet and the Aman. Aman especially, military intelligence especially. And the third is a whole bunch of military commanders are going to be sacked over this. Their careers are finished.
Abhijit, I want to ask you this very quickly because there's
अरे
a lot
किसी
of
और को पूछो,
propaganda.
मेरे से क्यों पूछते रहते हो?
No, quickly,
किसी और को
before I
पूछो
move on to everybody
and
else,
get and
no,
Because
get
of
very
him
who
right.
you are.
because you've been to
It's Rabbi
Gaza, because
Shmuley Schlampenberg.
because you've been to Gaza, because there's these conversations online and in other
You've been to
places that
Gaza?
there are areas that are very exclusive in Gaza, which are very expensive, and that Hamas leaders stay in those areas. Is that true, or is that just propaganda? Because you
Look, I
said
don't.
that Gaza's
They,
like a mess.
there are some areas which are more upmarket. True. I don't know if Hamas leaders stay there or they hide out at within apartment blocks. Because you can't. You have to be very careful out there. You can't go around asking where Hamas leaders stay. Whereas if you're in Jerusalem, you can say, "Oh, can you show me the prime minister's house? I want to take a photo outside it." They'll be fine. You dare not ask that question. When I asked my guide to take me to where Ismail Hania lived, because I wanted to take, not Ismail Hania, I forget who the guy was. It was a much lower level guy. He was like, and put his hand here, because these are not things you ever ask in Gaza. You don't ask where the leadership lives, and the guide doesn't tell you squat. Okay, so there is a great deal of wealth in Gaza, which is concentrated in very few hands. It isn't all that visible, like the income differentiation isn't all that visible because it's a small area and people talk. Most of the wealth lies concentrated outside of Gaza in areas like Dubai or Doha, mostly Doha and Istanbul and places like that.
Sandeep,
Advaita,
quickly, yeah, go
I
ahead.
don't know how much you've been following the advent and the thing of Arafat and the Palestinians. if you go back into history, there was a group called Black September, which had unleashed a mountain of terror on Israel, right from Munich downwards.
Munich, yeah.
And at that point in time, it was very clear that Yasser Arafat was nothing but a hoodlum who was hoarding a lot of cash, and all that cash was actually in Paris. Even the leaders of Black September in those days were living between Istanbul and Paris. Everyone knows this story. But the so called Western media, which is quick to sanction any government, any organization, was completely blindsided as far as this money was concerned. It's exactly what Zelensky is doing. The amount of money Zelensky has made, there's a very famous book, Everybody Loves a Famine. It's also true, everybody loves a war. At least the people directing the war love it. Today, Zelensky's hoarded the kind of money that you and I can't imagine. And that's the reality, but no one wants to talk about it because then you're seen as illiberal or non woke, whatever the fish that they say.
Yeah. And Sandeep, quick question to you, and then the last one for Abhijit before we wrap up. We're already at 8 p.m. Sandeep, I want to know from you, there's this talk about escalation. Seeing the landscape of the world, what impact do you think this is going to have around the world in terms of business, in terms of travel, all of that? The fact that now we have two war fronts in the world, Ukraine, Russia, and now Israel, Palestine, with Hezbollah kind of shooting rockets out, and Israel watching, keeping one eye on the Syrian border. What do you make of this
If
situation?
this
And how,
escalates, Advaita, I think then the polarization or the divide will be far more, not just real, but far more lethal. Yeah, Ukraine issues, more, I think, on bordering on the ideological. Not very many people were convinced, so they were taking one side or the other because of certain political leanings or ideological leaning. But here, it is going to become a very, very clear divide because one hand you'll have the Islamic world, Arab world, who will have to totally side here, and then whether you like it or not, the US and many other countries, Western countries, will, while making all the right noises, will have to support Israel for the sake of also maintaining the balance. They might try to do certain things, replacing Netanyahu or whatever. But then, if this escalates during that period, I think you're going to see far more serious military as well as economic divide and a standoff, and that can really put the world onto a new spin altogether. A good part of it, Ukraine may get solved in the process. People will go disinterested in Ukraine.
okay, thank you for that perspective. And Pallavi, if you finished eating and drinking, can we ask you what? Let's switch off from
I'm
this
having
topic.
moody.
Okay,
I'm having
can we
moody.
can we ask
Today,
you what?
Ratri begins.
Give us some domestic political gupshup because we need to come back to India.
Abhijit knows it. Bolo, bolo.
What? क्या? फिर से पूछो? What gupshup? I've tweeted everything I know. I'm pure and pious.
Let's not get into the realms of gossip and all that. But
No,
in
not
terms of
gossip. I want to know, what do we have to look forward to in terms of the big political
That's
moves in the next
Nothing.
week?
Just run the program on time.
Yeah. Okay,
and run it regularly.
yeah,
Regularly.
regularly. I was chief guest 2 weeks ago, so I couldn't do that.
Ah.
Let me trigger Suhel.
Okay.
No.
God,
You're being chief
Can we get
chief
your
guest.
autograph? Nobody calls
like,
her chief guest, so
does
she
it
wants
like-
us all to know she's been chief guest.
Like
I
Pallavi
love
cutting
how it
ribbon in a
was
housing society, the outpost with
Listen,
security
chief
outpost.
guest is a chief guest wherever you may be a chief guest. Let me
She
just make
is.
that clear. And none of you have been a chief guest in a long
True.
time, if ever.
True.
So,
True.
on that note, thank you
There are
everybody.
elections going to happen. I think that is also important. We have to start focusing on that. I'll
We
travel.
know elections are
I'll
going to happen.
eat. I'll
She's
enjoy
from
myself.
Madhya Pradesh. For everybody who wants to follow her culinary
Yeah.
journey in Madhya Pradesh.
Let's poha.
More than
only
poha. You take some tip from me. I'll tell you a few other things to have in Madhya Pradesh. Chalo.
So long they are decent, tell me.
I
And
will tell
someone
you.
actually said that Suhel got two comments. One was, has he taken on a leftist partner or paramour because he's looking unwashed? And the second comment is, he's looking like a desi George Clooney. So,
Good.
I
Whoever
don't
that is,
believe in
a
the second
nice
one.
person is good. Thank you.
Suhel,
thank
you
you
take
everybody
care
for
of
watching.
yourself. Take care, yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah,
And
No
please,
matter
everybody.
however you are, we do all
I just want to say that George Clooney looks like Suhail Seth. It's not the other way around. Please tell
yeah.
him.
See,
That's
that's why I
not true,
love
Abhijit.
Abhijit.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
That's bullshit, Abhijit.
What?
But
You're just jealous.
okay. Chalo.
Okay,
On that
everybody, this
note,
can go
but
forever.
but
So,
yeah,
yes.
Suhel has a prettier wife than George Clooney. I can say that.